Hi, everybody. Thank you so much once again, for taking time out of your day to join us. As you may be aware, today's topic is really around the implications of AI in healthcare and specifically around cybersecurity and privacy. So we do have a lot to cover with you today. For those of you that may have seen the slide prior to this one that says we're going to be going to 5 p.m., I don't think that'll actually be the case. We'll probably go more about an hour or so. So just wanted to clarify that. So in any case, I'm John Gomez with CloudWave. And with that, let me jump into this presentation. So there are about 4 different areas we're going to focus on today. First, we're going to make sure we all kind of are on the same page when we're thinking about AI. So at a very high level, we're going to try and establish a little bit of a baseline for those of you that are new to it. This may give you a little bit of an operational framework in terms of how you may think about AI in healthcare specifically. We're going to talk a little bit about AI defenses and how to effectively deal with threats and challenges. We will talk about how to construct AI policies. And one thing I will mention is we have developed a AI policy template. I'll talk more about that as we go through the presentation, and also explain how to get a copy of a policy template in the event that you feel that you would like to deploy an AI policy template for your hospital or healthcare organization. Ultimately, at the end, there's a little game that it's kind of like a truly mini 5-10 minute tabletop that is AI focused, and hopefully if you stay through that, you'll get a little bit of benefit in terms of, or an experience of how to deal with an AI-based attack. So a lot to cover with you today. If you have questions at any point in time, please feel free to put them into the chat window. Do my best to respond to those at the end. And if we can't respond, we'll do our best to try and hopefully get you an answer if possible. So with that, let's go ahead and get into this and talk about a little bit of an AI baseline. So basically, again, I'm just trying to establish a way for us to think about AI. I think AI is a little bit different than many of the other technologies that we may use in healthcare day to day. And the reason to this, and obviously this is just a technology, right? It's not a specific solution such as an EMR, RIS-PAC, or what have you. But I think we can divide AI into 2 distinct kind of I guess, components, if you will, in terms of how we look at it from the healthcare perspective. And one is what I would consider enterprise AI, right? Those are where AI is embedded in a solution that happens to be on the network or is relied upon by end users throughout the healthcare ecosystem. And so there are specific implications to that. And as we think about securing our environment and also policy and procedures, we need to be thinking about enterprise AI and what are we doing there. And I would also classify within enterprise AI any tools that we may use that rely on AI for defensive security, right? Things that may be monitoring our networks or performing antivirus or anything of that nature. So we have that entire kind of category of enterprise AI in healthcare. We then, on the other side of this, have offensive AI. And again, we need to think about how AI can be used by attackers or employed by attackers to cause compromise against our environment. And I think the interesting, and it's interesting, but it also creates a lot of complexity, is that you could take offensive AI and go against traditional systems that are non-AI. You could go against enterprise AI systems. Enterprise AI systems themselves can become adversarial. So it's a very deep topic, right? This entire kind of gamut of AI. And I guess one thing I should mention at the outset here is that we can't certainly cover all of it. So I'm going to try to hopefully create somewhat of a foundation for you. I would not be surprised if it opens up more questions than answers, and that this is a topic that with time we need to continue evolving our understanding and really trying to stay ahead of the curve, right? And I think that's really important with this because, as we all know, this is moving so quickly on many different fronts that if we don't stay ahead of it, then eventually we'll obviously be left behind, and that's not a great place to be. So hopefully first pass here, and again, I'm just putting ideas out here that with time hopefully can become a backbone of how we think of things, and maybe there are better ways. And if you have a better way of categorizing what we're trying to think about when it comes to AI, please feel free to reach out. But for now, we're kind of dividing the world into all things that are enterprise focused with AI, they're beneficial, they're helpful to us, and then adversarial or offensive AI. So we're going to spend most of our time talking about offensive AI, though we're going to touch upon enterprise AI and the considerations there. We'll kind of fluidly move back and forth. But I think, to start, before we get into the offensive stuff, one of the things I'd like to do is further break down enterprise AI, right? Because again, we need to really think about, when we use that term AI, that there are so many different subsegments to AI, right? We can get into machine learning and genetic algorithms and neural nets and rule-based systems, and even within rule-based systems, we have forward and backward chaining and fuzzy systems, expert systems. It kind of can become very overwhelming, as I mentioned, right? So I'm trying to keep us above water if we can. And so within enterprise AI, the way I've broken this down is we have application AI, right? These are any software application which is used, which rely upon or uses AI, right? So again, this would be our EMRs, our scheduling systems, possibly payroll, or revenue cycle management, things of that nature, right? Anything that's a software application that utilizes AI. And when we say utilize AI, it doesn't mean it has to just be AI. AI could just be a subcomponent or a small component of the actual application. The second thing we need to think about with AI is devices. What devices do we have in our organization that rely upon AI? And I think our mind goes first and foremost to things like medical devices, and which can be further broken down again to life and diagnostic devices. And that is valid, and we need to really think about what devices in our environment, medical devices in our environment, have AI, but we need to also take a broader uh, viewpoint of devices, right? Because this could be everything from physical security systems to facilities management systems to HVAC management systems. So devices is, again, a very broad concept here that we can further divide. But again, we need to categorize it between application and device. And then there's, I think, more of utilitarian AI. These are things where we're directly relying upon AI to help us. This, I think, would be things like chat assistants. ChatGPT would be a great example, or bots, right? So this is where we're truly just interacting directly with AI, and it's not hosted in some other application. So why is all this important? Well, today, if we take AI out of the picture, one of the big things that hinders incident response, disaster recovery, business continuity, strategic planning, and all that is not having a good handle on our assets, right? If we don't understand the software and hardware assets within our environment and the medical device assets we have, it becomes really hard to figure out, how do we recover that environment? How do we protect it? How do we respond? What's at risk? What's not at risk? So what we're saying here is, not only do you obviously need to know all that in today's world, as we progress further, we need to have some kind of construct that tells us which of our assets are AI enabled. Because as you'll see as we go through this, understanding the type of threat, right? Understanding what type of an attack we're seeing, and what the attack is going after, also seeing the outcome of behavior, could require us to understand, is this something that's using traditional logic, or does this have AI involved in it, and how does that change our ability to respond? So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a kind of nomenclature framework to consider AI in your environment from an enterprise perspective, and really kind of think about, how do you ultimately get to, and probably now's the time to start thinking about this, some type of asset inventory that can tell you this asset is using or relies upon AI or not. And then if you got to that point, maybe take it to the next level of, well, what type of AI is being used here, and how is that AI updated? And we'll talk more about that when we get into policies. But this is a fundamental thing. I mean, you can have all the policy and procedures in the world, if you don't know what systems in your environment are actually supposed to be regulated by those policy and procedures, it really doesn't help anybody, right? So I would urge you to start thinking in terms of, from an enterprise perspective, what are we doing with AI? What applications, devices, and utility tasks do we have that are supporting AI or using AI? And then how do we track that and understand how that's within our environment? So when we think of offensive computing and just in general, how do we go after an environment? I try to simplify this. There are obviously attack chains that we can use, and that's great, but I think they kind of make it a little too complicated. And in most cases, when we look at attacks, they kind of use this pattern here. And typically what's happening in any attack is we're going to gather some form of intelligence. And even if it's a little bit of intelligence, we're doing something. It could be as simple as the organization's name or IP address, all the way through to more advanced techniques to kind of quantify open source intelligence and things of that nature. The second thing that's typically going to happen in an attack is some form of vulnerability assessment. We're trying to figure out what's vulnerable that we can use to then infiltrate, exploit, and then exfiltrate from that environment or that target, or we may pivot from that. But generally, we're using these different I guess category is a good word for it, right? These different phases of the attack with any type of offensive computing. So I'm going to use this as a construct as we go forward to keep things a little bit more simple and help us understand where AI on an offensive side could possibly play a role. And as offensive, when we talk about offensive AI, we're really talking about anything that can become either a security or human life risk to the hospital, right? And employs AI. So that's kind of it, right? And we can certainly break it down more from there, but offensive AI's ultimate goal is to either circumvent security or create some type of human life risk. And we can talk more about that if you wish, but it's kind of, in my eyes, the long and short of it. So let's talk about, well, what can you do with offensive AI when we think about these different phases of an attack stages, right? So from an intelligence gathering, and I'll talk more about what are we seeing today, what are we not seeing, and kind of where is this kind of going and evolving. So when we think about offensive AI in these different stages, one of the things we should be thinking about is, okay, how am I going to defend against this, right? How am I going to know or detect it, right? How do I even detect that this is occurring? And what steps can I take to defend and then ultimately respond to if I had to? So for an intelligence gathering phase, right, in this phase of the attack, we're just trying to figure out, we're reconning the environment, we're reconning users, we're trying to understand the organization depending on the sophistication and complexity of our attack. So AI algorithms are now doing an amazingly good job at social engineering. We'll talk more about this, but this includes things like deepfake videos, deepfake imaging. We have started to see the construct for quite some time now, even prior to ChatGPT, the construct of voice. In fact, this has been kind of perplexing because we've had several situations over the past 3 years where there have been attacks against organizations and the attacker has used voice and the victim, the actual human victim, has said, well, that sounded exactly like my CEO. I got a phone call, they were panicked, they said I had to transfer some money, I had to do this or that, and it sounded exactly like my CEO or my CFO. And what we started to think over these past 3 years as defenders is that, oh, there must have been call centers, or somebody got really smart and got some voice actors and they studied the CEO and CFO. And what we're seeing is that thinking starting to change, in that attackers may have just been employing some advanced deep fakes on voice. And that's concerning because you may not know that the phone call you get is actually the person that is telling you to do something or not. So this kind of changes the game, right? It allows attackers to up everything they do. So intelligence gathering and the algorithms being used there, we're seeing it today. I'll talk more about it in a little bit. Vulnerability assessment, machine learning algorithms, these, I think there's two typical things that we see when we're doing vulnerability assessment, or I should say one thing we see in today's world, and then something new that's brought to the table by offensive computing. What we see today is if you run a vulnerability scan, typically you're going to find that you get a list back of potential vulnerabilities, CVEs or CVSSs, and possibly exposed ports and exposed services. And one thing we've been preaching about for a very long time is most organizations just patch your highs and your criticals. Maybe you get to some of the mediums and almost never get to the lows, or if you do get to them, it's a long time, right? It's once a year you go out and try to get everything patched. And yes, there are organizations that are much more aggressive about patch management, but patch management has always been a challenge for many. The problem here is, and what offensive computing brings to the table, is that the AI is not just looking for the traditional list of vulnerabilities, right? What it's doing is it's saying, hey, can I do vulnerability chaining? And how can I do that intelligently? Now, we've known vulnerability chaining at a human level has been something that we've seen on and for years. And that's why we always recommend you have to patch everything, because a smart attacker will do vulnerability chaining and eventually take 2 or 3 lows and a medium and find a way in. Here, what we're talking about is AI doing that, being smart enough to look at the environment, look at the vulnerability assessment it's conducting, and learn and become smart enough to know that if I take 2 lows and a medium, I can create a high, and that allows me access. Now, the issue and the challenge here is that this can be done much faster by a machine as it continues to learn. And if it's looking at, say, 1,000 computers across the world, it's going to have a much better body of experience than any human attacker that may take 5, 6, 7 years to come up with the same level of understanding once the AI system understands it. So vulnerability assessment under an offensive computing category becomes much, much more challenging for us, right? Because now, where we may have in the past been able to say, well, we're just going to patch maybe the mediums, the highs, and the criticals, we're now got to think about vulnerability chaining in a whole different light. And if you leave lows out there, you may be in for a big surprise. So that then brings us well, I have these reverse apologies, but we'll talk about exploitation. Is really kind of exploiting the vulnerabilities, right? Once we understand whether we're using vulnerability chaining, or directly going after a vulnerability, or discovering something new, we have the ability then to adjust our taxes based on the target system and the responses we see from that system. This becomes pretty challenging in that between our intelligence gathering, vulnerability assessment, and exploitation phases, we can at times start to think about the fact, does AI have the ability to come up with new 0 days? Again, one of the big efficiencies here is speed. Right, is the way and the amount of time that AI can learn. And once it understands how to learn, it's going to do it much faster and typically at a better confidence factor than a human. Infiltration, this again becomes concerning, right? And this is a real important when we start thinking about AI in our devices or in our applications, where AI starts to mimic user behavior. And this, is concerning because a lot of times we're thinking about things like network behavioral analysis, right? Like we detect that the network behavior is somehow not normal against the baseline. So we have defensive tools that will monitor for any changes in our baselines, or behavioral patterns by end users. Users log in at a certain time and log off at a certain time. We see something outside that norm, we start thinking that's an anomaly and potentially a security issue. One of the things that AI can do is remain covert and observe behavior, right, once it has access to a system. And so once that happens, if it starts to understand behavioral patterns, whether they're network-based, end-user-based, or application-based, it can attempt to fit within those patterns. And now it becomes an advanced persistent threat. An APT attack becomes even much more difficult to detect, because you now have an adversary who is mirroring what the normal is for your environment. And so that becomes really difficult when we're thinking about the infiltration. Exfiltration, kind of 2 different ways to think about this. One is that we're exfiltrating data, and the other one is, how do we get ourselves exfiltrated without ever letting somebody know that we were there. And again, since we're talking about learning and evolution of systems, this becomes kind of an advantageous capability for offensive computing, right? Now, everybody involved in offensive computing, attackers are always going to be thinking about what's the most valuable data to take, or what is the, how do I get out of here without anybody knowing I was here? Can I clean up anything I did to registries or file systems? Can I remove, things from logs? Can I do those things? I think the difference with AI is, especially when it comes to data exfiltration, is typically attackers aren't real sure in most cases what is the data that they're exporting, exfiltrating, right? So they're basically, in many times, grabbing data, and then once they have your data, they'll analyze it offline, right? If they're, you know, back at the shop, if you will. Here, what the systems can start doing is start realizing what is it that I'm looking at, and is there a value in this data versus data set A versus data set B. Now that's extremely important for an offensive computing capability, because if I have an agent, if I have a software agent, an AI agent that can determine the value of data on the fly without setting off alarms and bells and whistles, I also reduce my chances of getting caught, because rather having to take both data set A and B, if the agent determines that, hey, data set B has more PII, more PHI, more whatever, and only exfiltrates data set B, I then have the ability to reduce my chances of getting caught, because ultimately I'm not making as much noise. Hopefully that makes sense, right? In one case with the human, I'm probably going to grab as much data as I can, even if it's a little bit of data over time. But if I have an agent on premise that can analyze systems, applications, and understand the correlation of those systems and applications to the type of data produced, then I'm going to probably reduce my chances of getting caught and increase the value of the data that I actually take. So my hope here in kind of giving you this walkthrough of the different stages of the attack and correlating to that the types of things we can see AI doing or are doing today, from an offensive standpoint, I hope that this starts to get you to think about the fact that defending about all this and detecting and responding to it is a bit different than maybe what we've seen in the past, right? I think this is more, years ago, probably back in 2015, 14, I was involved in some things where there was a type of attack called a K to K attack. K to K attack stands for keyboard to keyboard. And what happens in a keyboard to keyboard attack is you have a bunch of adversaries who attack a system, right? Attack an environment. Let's say if we were going to do keyboard to keyboard, I would have me and my minions, and we would come after your hospital. And we would just start coming after all kinds of stuff: your VPN, your firewall, your portals, your corporate sites, your, anything exposed that we can get to, phishing campaigns, all at one time. And not only are we going to do that all at one time, we're going to continue to do that, for 72 hours straight. So we would organize ourselves in 8-hour shifts. We're going to have enough people on our side, right, to come after you. And then you're going to have to defend this in real time. You're going to see phishing attacks coming in. You have to notify users. You're going to see potential infiltration or defacement of your corporate website. You're going to have to figure out what to do there. Your VPN starts to see attacks. Now, these are not denial of service, right? I want to make sure we clarify, when the keyboard to keyboard, we're not just throwing a bunch of traffic at you. We're coming at you with a variety of different attacks all at one time, or very close together. So keyboard to keyboard attacks are extremely intense, because you're seeing hundreds of alerts. You need to qualify what's false positive, what's not. And these are really hard to defend against. If you can think about your IT staff being completely having to deal with a external attack that's trying to capitalize on multiple vectors. Now, many of you are going to say, well, I would just air gap the hospital, which is great. And if you've done air gap exercises and you can survive air gapped, then awesome. But think about what happens if the keyboard to keyboard attack was coming from within your own environment and in your own network, and now it's inside of your environment, and it has the intelligence to do multiple attacks inside your network, and even maybe prevent your capabilities of doing certain things. And now we've taken the keyboard to keyboard human attack, moved it inside of your network, and we now have these agents that are smart enough to do this stuff on their own. That's a really taxing situation, right? So My point on all this is how we respond to this and how we respond to AI attacks is much more dynamic, I believe, than what we've been used to in traditional cybersecurity and traditional systems. So hopefully this is making sense. I went a little bit off script, but I'm trying to give you as much information as possible. The net here is we do need to, as of right now, think about cybersecurity differently, right? Back in 2013, 14, I used to say the emperor had no clothes because many of the things we were doing back then just really made no sense in terms of cybersecurity defense. And I think we're back there again, right? We're kind of now with this, we really are kind of exposed into, well, how do we deal with real-time AI-based counter offensive computing type attacks? So we'll keep talking and see what else we can do. So there are a few different types of AI attacks that we typically see, and there's probably more than this, but I wanted to kind of establish again some baselines and things we can build upon as we go forward. So what I just talked to you about was just generically for each stage of an attack, what type of things are we seeing? What type of things do we need to think about? So now we're taking the next step in making this a little bit more concrete in terms of the actual types of attacks that we believe AI can pull off. And I want to say one thing is I keep saying we believe or we see. So we're going to get to a point in this presentation where I'm going to very clearly point out to you that this is happening today, these types of attacks that we're going to talk about. So adversarial attacks, these are extremely, to me, they're interesting, but they're kind of a nasty attack. And this is somewhat of that K to K thing I just mentioned. So this is where AI is going to manipulate the input of data, right? And so this is actually taking, say, a CAT scan or an MRI, and it's going to subtly alter the PIXA values, right? It's going to subtly change this. Now, I'm going to tell you right here and now, this attack has actually occurred. It's occurred in a research lab in Israel where AI adjusted pixels within an MRI, and when the MRI images were presented to either another system that read the MRI using AI or to radiologists, both of those situations, right? The AI reading the image that was altered or the physician reading the image that were altered, both believed there were tumors that were in these MRIs, right? And these MRIs were typically of brain scans. And so this has already been done, right? There's some papers and research out there on this topic. So we know adversarial attacking and AI can happen. Now, I want you to think back to the stuff I just talked about. To do an attack like this, you need a lot of time, right? You're not going to just go in and change 100 MRIs. That's not really AI. Just write a Python app to do that. This is being done in a way where the adversary is not going to be detected. It's a very subtle attack that happens over time. Again, advanced persistent threats taken to a new level. And so the challenge here is that you now have an adversarial AI or an offensive computing component that's focused on adversarial attacks that is causing false positives. And that could lead to misdiagnosis or to mistreatment, obviously, of patients, which could also lead to eventually a negative outcome for that patient. Now, this is just one example of how an adversarial attack can be done, right? Because it's been done, and we know it's been done. The question here is, how do you safeguard against that, right? How do you now, what's kind of, if you think about it, the front line is new, right? Because the front line for attacks in most cases have always been the network and the data on that network and the systems on that network. Now the front line is in the hands of the clinician. How do you know if what you're looking at actually is real or not? How do you know that your system hasn't been attacked or that the images haven't been manipulated? So this is one form of adversarial attack, but the idea here is that we're misleading the AI system, right, to make incorrect decisions. And this could be done for anything. Another example outside of healthcare would be giving a vehicle that has an AI capability, like a Tesla autopilot, inputting false values so that the AI reacts differently than it should, right? So now I want to be clear, we're not retraining the AI system, right? We're just using the AI system to create a security issue, right? Ultimately, something that it shouldn't be doing. The next piece on this is data poisoning. This is where we change how the AI system has been trained. So in this case, if the AI knows based on these types of, if it's been trained on these several different factors, these several different variables, and it knows that if I see those variables, here's how I'm going to react to them because of my training and my past experiences as an AI engine, what you do here is you hope to retrain that engine. Now, this has a lot of effect in where we do behavioral analysis. For years now, one of the questions that's come up is, well, how do you get around network monitoring tools that are doing behavioral analysis? And the answer to that is you retrain the baseline, and you do that slowly over time, and you start inputting things into the behavioral baseline that change the baseline to your advantage as an attacker, right? So that's an example of retraining the AI model. Right, the way a human example of this, a real world example, is your neighbor has a dog. The dog is a guard dog, and is trained at to come after anybody that comes into the property. So you're the neighbor, and what you do is you go out there every night around midnight. If the dog's out there, you give the dog a little piece of steak, not a lot of steak, a little tiny piece, and every day you give it a little more steak. And you keep doing that for a period of a couple of weeks, and suddenly this dog is not antagonistic towards you, right? Because over a period of time, you've retrained that dog to not see you as a threat. And the owner is going to probably either not understand or notice, or if they do, they're going to be scratching their head as to what just happened and why is my dog like you. Same thing here. We're retraining the network. We're feeding it a little bit of steak. So ultimately, whatever AI is used on that system is going to be retrained in a manner that's beneficial to us. So I'm going to talk about two different types of attacks, right, that I have a lot of interest in and I play around with and have been working on for quite some time to try and pull off from an offensive computing. And I think ultimately, I think this will be the standard in terms of advanced adversarial attacks or advanced offensive computing that is AI based. The first is genetic algorithms. And so genetic algorithms, what they are, simply stated, is that you allow the computer to spin up different approaches to solving a problem. And different approaches are tried. Many of them will fail, but a few of them will succeed. Whatever the problem is you're trying to solve, you can start very simply and get more complicated with time, but ultimately the pattern is the same, right? I create variations of a solution, and some of those solutions succeed or survive, if you will, and those that survive continue to get smarter and keep repeating that process, right? If I have 100 solutions and then 60 of those survive, and then from those 60 another 30 survive, and then another 20, eventually the way that we solve that problem becomes a dominant methodology or algorithm for solving the issue. So the way we would use this, obviously, in in cybersecurity for offensive computing is the problem is how do I brute force an environment? How do I perform reconnaissance on an environment? How do I, whatever it may be. And so what happens here is you unleash a genetic attack, a genetic algorithm-based attack against an environment. And as that attack is progressing through the environment, it really quickly begins to figure out what is the proper solution for attacking the environment, right? So in this case, we're not just thinking about attacking maybe one system. Maybe we're thinking about how do we go after the entire hospital, and what is the best way to go after this hospital and continue to find a way to refine our attack in such a way that becomes a very, very, very effective attack against that organization. As you can see here in the bottom of the thing, this could result in a highly optimized attack that has been evolved to overcome specific defenses, right? So the system is going to learn what did you deploy, and it's going to find ways around that. And the creepy part about this, if that's not creepy enough for you, is this is all being done on its own, right? So we're just unleashing this genetic algorithm capability, and it's going to do this over time. So I don't want you to think like this is something that is happening in 3 or 4 seconds. This could happen over 3 or 4, 5, 6 months as the system is learning and failing and achieving its goals. It could happen in a few seconds if you already have something that has the output of a genetic algorithm and is now optimized to come after your environment. So we could see that, but I want you to not always think these things happen in a few seconds. I want you to understand that these are can take some time to pull off, but the idea here is not to give themselves away when that happens. So the second part of this is a swarm attack, right? So this is kind of where we learn from nature, and we realize that if we take ants or bees, one of the things that makes ants and bees very successful is their ability to coordinate. So you can have an ant colony that goes out and looks at a rather large area, and based on that area it looks at, it learns from that geography, the soil moisture and what type of food sources and moisture sources and temperature and a bunch of other things, and all of that information is shared back, right, so that all of the ants in the colony itself become smarter and smarter. So the idea here would be that we coordinate an attack. So we now have genetic algorithms with swarm intelligence capability, and they come together to coordinate an attack. So again, earlier I talked to you about keyboard to keyboard attacks. And the thing here is we're kind of replicating that keyboard to keyboard attack, but again, in an automated fashion with artificial intelligence. Both GA and swarm intelligence are things that we've seen work. We have not seen them, thankfully, in the wild. But these are the types of things that, again, change our ability to defend. And we have to now become much smarter about how are we going to detect and defend and respond to these types of attacks, right? And the reason I wanted to kind of go to this extreme in this presentation is I think it would be a disservice to just talk about ChatGPT and just talk about, neural nets. What I really want you to understand is, what do we need to be doing and what do we need to be thinking about over the next 3 years as we see AI truly evolve? And what's kind of, I don't want to say the end state, because this isn't the end, right? When we take Swarm and GA is not the end of offensive computing. Now, the other thing to think about is any of these things I'm mentioning could be used for good, right? There's a lot that can be done with GA and Swarm to simulate disease states and simulate different types of responses, and different drugs can be used, developed using Swarm intelligence and GA. So there's a lot of things that could be good about this. Unfortunately, in our world, all that's left to someone else. Our focus is, what are the attackers going to do? What are they doing? And what do I have to do to defend myself? And ultimately, I think the important part here is, you need to start planning now, right? If I would have told you 5, 7, 8 years ago that ransomware was going to be this big thing, and you need to start thinking about what you're going to do now and put strategies in place to prevent ransomware attacks, your environments would probably be very different, and probably we wouldn't have had to go through this process of, what do we do now? We're in the middle of this. We're seeing ransomware happen. We're seeing hospitals being taken down. So this is kind of the same thing. What I'm trying to say here is, probably 2 to 3 years from now, you are going to see genetic algorithm and swarm intelligence as a foundational type of adversarial attack. And some of you or some of us in the industry are going to be scratching our heads and scrambling and going, I wish somebody would have said this is what's going to happen. And others of us will start thinking about ways that we position ourselves and are ready to defend against that. And so kind of guess this is your call to arms, if you will. So I'm going to skip over this, but I will give you a minute or two to read what's on the screen, or I'll try to read it to you. Basically the attack I just provided to you is quote unquote hypothetical. So basically if we think about it, I'm just going to read this to you. In this hypothetical scenario, the effect on hospital staff, clinicians, IT security personnel, and others would likely be severe and alarming. The initial stages of the attack might go unnoticed by the staff. With the attackers leveraging advanced AI techniques, the infiltration could remain covert, with standard system behaviors masking the malicious activities. But when the disruption to life support systems begin, clinical staff might be the first to notice that something is wrong. Clinicians could start seeing inexplicable changes in patient conditions, particularly those dependent on life support systems. For instance, patients on ventilators could experience sudden respiratory distress, or those receiving medication through automated infusion pumps might show signs of under or overdosing. This could lead to an immediate crisis on the wards, the healthcare staff rushing to manually correct the settings while trying to maintain patient care. So part 2 of this is, meanwhile, the hospital's IT security team might start receiving unusual system alerts. They could notice anomalies in network traffic or unexpected system behaviors hinting at data exfiltration. However, due to the sophistication of the attack, pinning down the exact issue would be challenging, adding to the sense of confusion and urgency. This could trigger a stressful, high-pressure situation as the IT security team races against time to detect, isolate, and neutralize the threat. The exact speed at which this scenario would unfold would depend on various factors, including the sophistication of the attackers, the specific vulnerabilities they exploit, and the effectiveness of the hospital's cybersecurity measures. However, considering the advanced AI techniques used, the entire process could potentially unfold within hours or days rather than weeks. The rapid escalation would only compound the feeling of chaos and desperation among the staff. It's important to note that this hypothetical scenario paints a bleak picture. Still, it serves to underline the potential threats facing modern healthcare systems and the importance of robust AI-enhanced cybersecurity defenses. Now, I'm going to go back to this slide, and basically this slide talks to you about what this attack is that was just analyzed. And so basically during the intelligence gathering phase, we see machine learning algorithms gather data about the hospital systems. We then move to vulnerability. A genetic algorithm generates and refines potential attack strategies. So we're seeing GA employed. Exploitation, the genetic algorithms produce an optimized attack strategy. Infiltration, a swarm of bots infiltrate the hospital's network, each with a specific task. Disruption, some bots subtly disrupt life support systems, causing inadequate care. Data theft, other bots exfiltrate patient data and diagnostic information from the hospital systems. Impact, the disruption to life support systems pose a risk to patients' lives, and the theft of data leads to a severe privacy breach. So the last column here is basically a 1 to 5, a 1 being little to no impact or severity, a 5 being critical possible disruption to human life. So in this attack, you can see we start off very subtly, low impact, and then quickly escalate up to levels 5. What I want you to take away from this is I developed an attack scenario based on genetic algorithms and swarming, and I fed all of that into ChatGPT. And I asked ChatGPT to come back to me, analyze how we would carry out this attack, which is what you see here. And then I asked it to analyze the effectiveness of the attack, which is this part 1 and part 2. What you see on the screen is actually what ChatGPT wrote in terms of the attack that would use both a combination of genetic algorithms and swarm intelligence. And I think this illustrates even a different kind of thought in offensive computing, where things like ChatGPT can be used as truly assistants to help refine attacks and refine AI. During my communication interaction with ChatGPT, I asked it, how long do you think it would take me to build a genetic algorithm that also utilizes swarm intelligence as part of an attack package? And it said, due to the complexity and challenges and blah, 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 and a bunch of other stuff, this could take several months, if not years. I said, well, what if I employed AI to help me arrive at the same place that it would take me several years? And then it came back and said that could probably be done in several weeks. So again, using AI is not just about, for an offensive computing environment, is not just about writing the code and sending out the attack or embedding AI in the payload. It's also about using AI to help develop the actual payloads and source code and actually plan the actual attack itself. So it is kind of daunting, right? So hopefully this is giving you some real clean insight into offensive side of AI, and why earlier on when I divided things into enterprise AI and offensive AI, I did that purposely because I think we do need to be able to understand which side of that equation we're thinking about as security professionals, right? Are we thinking about how enterprise AI is going to impact us, or are we thinking about how do we detect, defend, and respond to offensive AI? So I want to take you through some actual attacks that we've seen and starting to flourish using AI. One is going after passwords. So this has become pretty powerful over the past several months and actually predates ChatGPT. This is not ChatGPT. These are a lot of the things I just talked to you about, not using GA, genetic algorithms, or swarm, but using AI. So one thing we're seeing is brute force attacks, in which typically brute force attacks are pretty straightforward, right? If I'm going to come after you as a brute force, I may do like a rainbow attack or some dictionary style attack, or basically I have some kind of script or computer code that's just going to run different password combinations against a user's account. And that takes time, and I could just let the computer program run, and hopefully at some point it figures out what your pattern is. The defense to that is typically one of two things: MFA. So we're going to take MFA off the table for now, or that you have account lockouts, right? After 2 or 3 account lockouts, I get locked out for 90 minutes or something. So the way around that is a timer, right? I basically write, and I do this now when I go after people, is I'll just say, okay, if I get locked out, don't try again for 3 days, right? So now there's no pattern, or typically I'll randomize the date, and so maybe it'll come after you in 3 days again and try. It may come after you in 5 hours. It may come after you in 10 days. I don't have a time schedule, so I'm just going to keep doing it until I find out your pattern. But that takes a long time. So what's a better way? Well, a better way to brute force is what we're seeing now, and that's using AI to analyze OSI, right? Open source intelligence. So what happens here is the AI goes out and looks at things like your social media platform. It looks at a whole bunch of different things. And then it uses dictionary analysis and traditional techniques to refine the body of work. And what we've been finding is that it can pretty much crack passwords at about a rate of 100 billion password combinations per second, which is amazing, right? Now, can we throw 100 billion password combinations at a single system at one time? No. The idea here, though, is that the effectiveness rate is much, much higher than just a human sitting there that's written a computer code on its own to brute force. Now, we'll talk more about what can you do to defend. Credential stuffing, this has become even more powerful now. So credential stuffing is this. Somebody finds your user ID and password, right? Or you use a password that's already been compromised. And so let's say it's been compromised. Let's say you, for your Facebook password, that password got compromised. So what AI does is, again, go back to open source intelligence. And this is new. This is things that we haven't seen. They're just more complicated to do by humans than they are by AI. And what happens is you get AI to start figuring out, well, if you're doing Facebook, are you on LinkedIn? Well, if you're on LinkedIn, what company do you work for? Well, if you work for that XYZ company, or in this case, hospitals, can I then figure out what that hospital's using, right? Oh, the hospital's using Cisco VPN. So is there a way now to figure out that hospital's user account pattern? So maybe it's first initial last name at whatever hospital.com or .org or whatever. And so now the AI figures out, it's crosswalking, right? It figured out that you had a compromised password on Facebook that was leaked to the public, and it then crosswalks you from Facebook all the way back to your employer. And then it figures out, right, what your employer is using, what systems it has. It doesn't just have to be Cisco. It could be whatever, MyChart, Kronos, whatever you guys are exposing. And then it tries to figure out, well, now that I know where you work, because I figured out that your LinkedIn profile or whatever else you have out there, I'm going to go after that environment. And these crosswalks for credential stuffing are very effective. We've seen a couple of those and not in mass yet, but this is a really concerning thing, because now whatever password your user is using at work, if they're using the same password at home on their home personal devices, chances are the AI is going to figure out that correlation. The other one is phishing. Phishing has become day and night different. And if we're still teaching end users, we'll look for misspelled words or weird stuff with the domain name and don't click on it. Those things have to be continued to taught. But you need to start teaching them that phishing has changed. You can't really expect that in this day and age, there's going to be a lot of grammatical errors, or there's going to be a lot of misinformation. What's happening now is we're seeing AI being used by adversaries to scan and figure out annual reports, press releases, job postings, web pages, product brochures, partner websites, supply chains, and really figure out, go analyze who's connected to you on LinkedIn. Are they connected back to a company that is connected to the organization and does business with the hospital? So can we craft a phishing email that comes from somebody that works in that supply chain? So this has become much more sophisticated, and the rate of it happening is becoming much higher because it's cheap, right? We can enact these types of analysis now from an adversarial perspective and come up with very, very, very compelling emails. A real cheap way to do this is just go into ChatGPT and tell it to create a phishing email for you. Now, when you first do it, you're going to get something pretty crappy. But then if you sit there and just tell it to refine itself, and let's change this and let's change that, it's going to eventually, after about 3 or 4 tries and interactions with you, probably have a really compelling email that you can use for phishing attacks. So adversaries can do the same thing, but they're also doing it at a much broader scale, right? They're bringing in LinkedIn data, social media platform data, all this other stuff, press releases, job searches, all of that to create a compelling phishing email that is very targeted at a specific individual and makes it seem as if that is a natural part of conversation. So these are kind of some things we are seeing now, right? Earlier I talked to you about some things that I'm thinking or I'm pretty sure will happen in the next 2 to 3 years. This is happening today, right? We've accelerated the ability to do brute force. We've taken credential stuffing to a new level, and we've taken phishing to a new level. So what can you do to defend against this? One, size matters, right? You have to really drive home the idea that 8 character or anything sub 12 in terms of your character length for a password and not having complex passwords is a big deal. What we've seen is AI brute force attacks can destroy an 8 character password, even complex passwords, within 22 minutes. And I'll explain the over several days later, but basically 22 minutes. Password should be, what we're seeing is a minimum of 12 characters. And if you do that, you're talking about 34,000 years to crack. The thing I don't like about that is that it's just a race against time and efficiency. My suggestion to everybody nowadays when we're doing HIPAA and risk assessments for people or security architecture reviews is move to 25 character passwords. The reason for this is typically at that level, you're doing password phrases, right? You're doing some form of a sentence. Mary had a little lamb. It's still complicated. These are also easier for the user to remember. They don't write them down. It's a lot easier to remember, my son is great. My son graduates in 2024, something like that. Now you're saying, well, isn't that easy for AI to figure out? Well, you have to add complexity to it, right? You have to ensure complex use of character sets. The other one here is you've got to educate users. We do a lot of security awareness training, obviously all of us do, but you have to teach them what is a good password. Show them on a PowerPoint, this is a bad password, this is a good password. Don't just replace all the O's with zeros. That's really easy for AI to figure out. Not even AI, just a regular brute force attack. So you have to teach them that. It's important for end users to start to become aware of the use of AI and things like deep fakes and for voice, video, and imaging. Really important that you start that now and weave in AI-based security concerns and awareness into your security awareness training. Start teaching about leadership, right, and about bias and safety. All right, ChatGPT, I'm going to go through this real quick. We actually took a lot more time than I thought, so I want to be respectful of people. But within this here, what you see on the right-hand side of the screen is actually an ad for ChatGPT. And this is actually, if you click on that link, it is going to take you to a fake ChatGPT site. The bottom line here is we're seeing tons and tons of ChatGPT Trojans. If you have an app on your phone right now and you didn't get it in the last 3 or 4 days for iPhone only, chances are it's a Trojan. And so it's probably a derivative work of what you see on the right-hand side of the screen. If you click that link, you can see the name Chat-GPT, it looks really good. You're going to get a website that looks like this. Now, this website you see right here is the actual real OpenAI.com, and they have just come out with an iOS app for ChatGPT. And this is a good and bad thing. It's good because, hey, now you have an iOS app from OpenAI. It's bad because now it makes it seem like OpenAI is putting apps out, and they're not. You have to be really careful about anything you're using that's not coming from OpenAI, right? So this is the real site. This is a fake site, right? Now this site, this color scheme actually was active for OpenAI last week. And you can see here download for Windows, but this is a fake ChatGPT site. And we're seeing a tremendous amount of users, hundreds and hundreds of thousands across all sectors that are downloading either this little thing or going to another website. And what you get is a little message like this that says you can't run for this version of Windows. But what's happened is in the background, a Trojan has been installed. This Trojan is known as trojan.psw or dash.psw win64.fubu. And it'll just monitor your accounts and start to do credential stealing. harvesting. So do not, it is really important. You have to advise end users through a webinar or through something. You have to do a lot of deep and rapid education. You have to explain to them. You have to go to the OpenAI site if you're going to use it. Some of you have blocked it, which is fine. But the problem is you're still going to find people getting around it and downloading the apps. And once the app is on their phone or on their desktop or on their tablets, the Trojans have been unleashed. So just blocking the OpenAI site does not stop this from getting a Trojan on your machine. Focus on clinicians. They're probably the biggest, especially doctors, playing around with how does ChatGPT work with medical diagnosis and things like that. I would tell you it's probably important to have an AI in healthcare session so people understand the implications here. All right, so defense. You basically have two different types of defense, technical and procedural. Technical is using AI against AI. Procedural is putting in place policies and procedures. All of the normal things you would do from a technical perspective, you should still do. The biggest one is patching and upgrading. You have to stay ahead of AI on that. Anomaly detection, right? Preventing the attacks from beginning in the first place, right? Employee training, network segmentation, threat hunting is actually something that isn't done a lot today in healthcare, but is probably much more important to see if you have something that's been deployed that is part of an APT style attack. And then really think about how we're going to recover if we see these types of attacks. These are all technical. Prior to the technical, one of the things you may want to think about is procedural. So I'm not going to go into each one of these, but we are, as I mentioned, putting together a policy template that allows you to take it and customize it, and that policy template will address each and one of these areas. What I want you to understand is this policy is not just for defending against offensive computing, but it helps establish standards and guidelines on what should you be asking vendors that use AI. And there's a lot. How are they doing bias training? What's their long-term support for AI models, and how are they updating those models, right? Because we're now just not updating features. We have to think about how do we update AI models. Can they transparently explain how the AI model works? What are they doing to support and protect against adversarial defenses? Earlier on, I talked to you about data poisoning and adversarial attacks. So what is the AI system embedded in your application or device or utility actually doing to defend itself against adversarial attacks? Can it be retrained? What is the risk of this AI in this application to human life? So all of this will be covered in that policy template that we hopefully can get to you for next week. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Not going to have time for this right now, but basically I have a little game. If you guys want the game, I'll give it to you. But basically the way this works is, first scenario, multiple servers are facing simultaneous logins and traffic patterns suggest swarm intelligence, right? There's some type of swarm attack occurring. The pattern of the attack is changing rapidly, hinting that not only is it using swarm techniques, but also genetic algorithms. So what would you do to defend against that? We see life support systems and diagnostic tools show signs of intrusion. The AI adversary appears to be retraining itself. So now we have an on-the-fly learning system based on genetic algorithms and swarm intelligence. So how do we deal with that? And then you're isolating the attack, but the AI continues to adapt and learn and continue to spread the threat across your environment. So what do you do about that? So it's basically a four-part kind of scenario, a little tabletop with some injects. Again, you can have copies of these slides if you want to play this out in your own environment. I will give you the answer. One, you need to mobilize people very quickly. If you have some type of swarm or genetic attack, really important to get as many people involved in this as possible. So you need some form of coordinated response. For us, that's Nightingale Orchestrator, our automation tool that we'll be bringing to market in the next few weeks. If the attack evolves, you really need to know where you have vulnerabilities from a patch perspective, right? And figure out how you're going to deal with that and how you're going to patch those systems quickly to stop the spread. Critical systems risk, you need to have your clinical rapid response team figuring out how they're going to respond to this, right? Because you need to get help to the bedside and protect patients. And then you have a battle against time, right? You could shut down all network operations, but chances are that's not probably the best course of action. So you need to figure out how you're going to counter the AI, right? It's basically you against AI. If you've watched movies like iRobot or others, that's now here, right? This is what this is talking about, is you against the AI, and how are you going to survive that type of a situation. So if you have questions, please put them in there. Just some things. I'll tell you how to get the policy in a moment. If you want the policy template, we have some events coming up over the next few weeks. If you're going to be at Muse, please visit with us. You can reach out. Happy to do one-on-one conversations or follow up to this, and have deeper conversations on not just this topic, but anything that you wish to talk about. So if you're going to be at Muse, or somebody from your organization is going to be at Muse, please have them reach out and see if we can find some time to get together. Not just myself, but all of my colleagues that'll be there from CloudWave. If you would like a copy of the policy and procedure template, this is very specific to healthcare. It is specific to AI. It'll be a Word document, so you can customize it however you wish. You can email customersfirst@gocloudwave.com. Your account executive will get that to you, and you're free to use it. Only 2 rules that I ask you please respect. First of all, this is the intellectual property of CloudWave. So this template that we're giving you, I wasn't going to do it. My marketing team and sales team said, hey, we think this is really important to get out in the hands of clients and members of CIP. So we are giving it to you, but it is intellectual property. Please do not share this or adopt it for any commercial use. If you are a commercial entity and you're part of CIP, you can't use this for your own assessments or products or anything like that. Second thing, you have to use this within your organization. So we also don't ask that you don't share this to other hospitals or organizations. If they'd like a copy, have them reach out to us. Happy to share it with other qualified hospitals or healthcare organizations. But those are the only 2 things we ask that you respect. Next webinar for us will be June 29th, and our hope is to have actual real-world hacker that will join us and kind of give us his perspective on attacks. We'll release further details as we get closer, but it should be a really interesting. Last time we did this, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 people attending. Really popular. It was very interactive. No PowerPoints, just me and him talking about how do we break into systems, how do we take them down, and what do we do, and what can you do. So that is on the 29th. With that, that's everything I have for you guys today. Sorry if we went a little bit over here, but hopefully you got a lot out of this. I know it can be a scary topic, and I know that it can be overwhelming. So for those reasons, feel free to reach out. Feel free to look us up at Muse, schedule one-on-one conversations with us, even if you're not going to Muse and you want to talk about this more. Always happy to chat. Laura, I don't know if we do have any questions or not, but if so, I can try to take them.
We do have one question that came in. What does ChatGPT say regarding creating a defense against the offensive scenarios you noted that were created by ChatGPT?
I didn't ask that. That's a great question. I can go back and ask, or if you guys wish, you can ask. But I didn't ask how to defend against it. I suspect, just going off the top of my head, based on the conversation I had with it, that it would say you have to patch. You have to assure that you have a coordinated response plan, things like that. But what I will tell you is, if you guys are interested in that, please reach out to customersfirst@gocloudwave.com, and I will post the answer. I will give the answer to the marketing team, and they can send you the response from ChatGPT so that it's in context of the history of the conversation we had. Any other questions?
There was one more that came in. It says, the question I always get when talking about this is, what is the purpose of these attacks for the attackers? What are the gains for them? Is it to hold facilities for payment, etc.?
Great question. So I typically divide attackers into 3, and I love the use of the word attacker and not hacker. I don't believe these are hackers, right? These are people attacking things. They're nefarious, right? So I divide attackers into 3 categories: cyber criminals, cyber spies, and cyber terrorists. Cyber criminal, and then I kind of further break it down into what is their motivation, which I think is what you're asking. So cyber criminals, typically always the motivation will be financial, right? Is there some benefit to them financially? So if I can exfiltrate data, hold you hostage, create a scare, impact your public image, those are all going to be financially motivating to me. And so that's going to be my motivation. Cyber terrorists, we don't see a lot of that right now. It's been an area, a category where many people have wondered why we don't see more attacks from cyber terrorists. That could change in the future. But when we do see a cyber terrorist attack, their motivation is principally financial, right? They typically take the money that they get from attacking a hospital or an organization, from ransomware or other types of attacks, and apply it to their real world operations to fund a group. We have seen a couple smaller attacks that are ideological based. And so there have been some pretty big ones that we've seen. So if you think back to WannaCry, NotPetya, all of those attacks were carried out by cyber terrorists. And they were not financially motivated, they were ideological, whether it's political or religious or something else, but those were attacks that we saw that destroyed systems, right? Their whole focus was to create destruction. That was their motivation, right? So if you think about Nuance and what happened to them, that was a very devastating attack, which took out tons and tons of systems. I think the number is like 18,000 servers or something. And there was no request for money, it was just destroy stuff. The third one, cyber spies, are basically nation state. And so you may at first glance say, well, you know, why would the nation state come after me? There's a couple reasons. One is you make good targets and learning opportunities. Secondly is, you know, it depends on the nation state, right? And we're not just thinking about China here, we're also thinking about Russia and North Korea, Iran, Pakistan in some instances. You know, there's been talk of some of the South American countries getting involved in some of this. So you do have that. So that's how I categorize them. And then for each one of them, those are typically the motivations that we see as terms of why. Other thoughts or questions, if any? I'm assuming no. So again, if you
no more questions, sorry.
Yep. I'm assuming, so if you have any questions, if you do have questions, or again, you want to just talk about this stuff, always happy to do so. Happy to do it at Muse or just otherwise. Always happy to just jump on a Teams call and chat. So feel free to email me directly or go, I totally forgot. Laura, what is the right email address?
It's customersfirst@gocloudwave.com.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody.